think we can get into it. We're going to do a slightly different format than we've done for the last couple of office hours and kind of go back to roots. Like in my mind, roots were there was a 2-year period where a handful of folks would get together weekly, I think, and like actively work on really real projects. No slides, no, it was like, I'm dealing with this problem, please help, which often came in the format of hey, Eric Harpstead or Stefan Slater, will you please help me with these statistics? Because I don't know any statistics and I need to even know how they work. There were a lot of those. So I was the beneficiary of many, many, many hours of meetings like that. So today we're going to not do slides and not do a presentation, but just like dig right into a problem that we're working through actively, hopefully as a community. And I'm going to try to facilitate this, but it's just going to be really messy. I don't know how everybody's like different role is going to play. So let me just say that it's okay if you like are really active during this conversation. It's okay if you have to hang back out of just kind of curiosity. But I would say that the high level question that we're getting at slowly but surely is, can we create interoperability standards for game data that we can put a name on and then start using? And that comes with so many caveats, right? Because I've been at SCORM trainings and slept through them. And I've, been parts of the X API discussions when DoD was really moving that forward. And like, there's this dangerous thing where if we try to move towards standards too strongly and too quickly, we're going to end up in kind of the same rut that a lot of those previous endeavors have ended up in, which is usually things that are too verbose or too complicated or too specific or too e-learning centric or too whatever centric. So it's like, how do we develop a thing that is really flexible, that will get adopted by the kinds of people making games that may or may not care about research downstream? So it's like, we're really trying to run that line between like, how do we get the most usefulness out of some coordination while, yeah, like keeping the computer scientists in check a little bit so everything can't be perfect and tidy to the point where it's like not usable by anybody. So we're trying to ride that line. And I would say that the goal that I wanted to kind of set out for us to do today is define the lightest weight set of standards, or we're using the word ontology, and I'll explain that in a second, that would allow analysis that are happening in one institution to work with games that are being produced somewhere else at a different time, and have visualization tools or replay tools that could plug into lots of games with no additional programming. So that's what we're trying to achieve. And the way that we're approaching this so far is, well, we haven't been, I'll just say that actually, like practically, if you look at any of the games I'm part of, it's just the Wild West. Like every game has its own set of events and every analysis looks for those particular events, and every tool we build looks for those analysis, and everything is so tightly coupled that every game stands on its own, every process stands on its own. So what I'd like to do is say we've got several projects right now that we're like in production on, probably 6 projects or so, and some of them are going to have really large audiences. And can we do it starting now? Like, could we define what some of those events are and some of those analysis are so that they work across all those projects without getting in the way of creativity? So yeah, and flexibility in design. So we've got that one paper I put in Slack that started to describe what an ontology is. But for today, I was hoping that what we would do is kind of like just keep building on this conversation that Luke and Eric and I have begun. And let's see if I can get this in a reasonable spot. There, yeah. And talk about ontologies and like don't like just check in. Like this makes sense. Now's the time talk is cheap, development's expensive, so like let's talk about it. And then the other one is take an inventory of some of the ontologies that we think might be the next ones to work on. And then I would say the third one would be identify any like breakout groups from this. Um, so that's the agenda for today. I would like to add one more piece up front though, which is just I'd love to do a check-in about open game data generally. Just to kind of like set the stage here. Where does this fit in and why this right now? So that's kind of where I'm thinking we go today. And as you can see, this is going to be our visual. It's just me typing in a doc that's shared with everybody. Okay, we cool? If anybody wants to leave now because they wanted some high density information, now's the time to hold no judgment. I didn't even spell it right. So really high level open game data project. So Eric and Maggie and I have a regular meeting, and then we've had many NSF meetings at this point. Since we started, a really great thing has happened, which is that the first large research infrastructure project dedicated to the social sciences data has been funded. And you're on that, Elizabeth, which is very cool. Do you want to give them like one sentence or like short summary of that project?
Sure. It's called Safe Insights. Rice is the prime organization, and we're aiming for some of the same things. Like we're trying to figure out how to connect data that's in our games with data that's in other like OpenStax, which is an online course or textbook system. So we want to be able for people to be able to create studies that involve both. Um, and yeah, we're the only games in there
Yeah.
right now. So
My summary of that whole project is, can we create safe, ethical, and infrastructural ways to connect data sets from things like games along with things like a state learning management system? So how do
yes,
we do that? So all the systems can talk while all the kids stay safe.
right.
Yeah.
And the essential thing for that design is basically the data stays where it or is from its origins. It is aggregated and shared with researchers through these things called enclaves.
Yeah.
So they never actually touch researchers don't touch the data. They write their own code, they figure out what they want to do, and they get their results back, but they never actually touch the actual data itself.
So it's so cool. And I'll say too that for sure we'll be moving towards getting open game data to be one of those spokes off of that project to see if there's ways we can do that. So that's really big news since we started. So that was a $80 million project, I believe. So not messing around. And what's come out of that is NSF has been coordinating um, a small community of people that got the award that Eric and I got, which was the incubator for how to create projects like that. And they've pulled us together in person along with some of the people kind of behind the scenes of that from the Learning Agency and Gates Foundation, and now have a community of practice that meets monthly that has people that have gotten this award along with people that are going for this award helping each other to like put in some really good proposals. So where we're at in our process is that we've kind of pivoted from doing, we were going to do like two big yearly events, basically like conferences, and we've pivoted towards a bunch of pilots instead. We said, let's actually try to do some things and see what problems we run into. So this has us connecting with all kinds of organizations, and we're trying to get new data in and running into legal and IRB problems there. And we're trying to like think about things like data standards to find out what kind of problems we run into. And we've just got, I don't know, we've got some like 17 pilots or something going right now in different directions that are all teaching us something about what we need, like what's missing. Um, and then some of them have just been really like, we're just taking ground. Like some of them are, we're just getting more games online, and some of them are, we're just getting the word out more. So open game data is part of, or open game data office hours is like part of that, which is like we're just learning about how to get a community around practitioners that would use this thing. But there's a whole bunch of that activity going on. The timeline of this thing is that starting basically right now, we're like actively moving into writing this proposal. So the proposal is going to be due sometime about this time next year. The date hasn't been set, but it's going to be something like mid-November of 25 is when the pre-proposal will go in for the bigger research infrastructure that we're proposing. So we're really trying to get our ducks in a row right now to like break out all the pieces of it, from technical infrastructure to legal infrastructure to community infrastructure that's needed, and just really get specific around what all those parts are. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So to position ontologies is like, it's one of the pilots, but it's also just the day-to-day for us, just doing our research work. And I'm hoping that if we can establish some of this, it's going to lead us towards a little more coordination than we have today. So let me define ontology. It really comes out of the idea that instead of doing a standard, instead of saying we are going to have a standard schema or a standard definition of data, we're going to be thinking about things that are kind of fundamental that exist within game data structure, like just as a high level, like what are the fundamental things that are there that we can put little packages around so that they can combine together and provide interoperability. So the vision of this would be, instead of saying you conform to the Open Game Data 1.0 standard, you would say you adopt the, I'm going to throw some of these out because we're starting. You adopt the users and session management ontology and the replay ontology and the progressions ontology. And what that means is that you adopt those little parts of this web of things that can be created and will always change. And if you adopt one of those little parts, that means that you're sending the events that are required, as well as you have named things that are optional by kind of like a predictable name, so that downstream tools and analysis and visualization and stuff will plug in automatically. So if you adopt it for a game, that means a whole bunch of features are calculated for free. And that means a whole bunch of models are calculated for free. And that means a whole bunch of tools will automatically work with your. So what we'll see is tools that are developed that define an ontology. So you can imagine a progression visualization tool that has the progression ontology. It has to be above 1.6 in your game, and then it just will work and it'll plug into any game. So the idea is every game, every analysis, every tool will adopt one or more ontologies. And by doing so, everything should plug into everything else that adopts that ontology. So that's kind of where we start here. And then I think the big assumption here is that games are particularly hard to do this with. And that's why we want to keep it really loose like this. Yeah, we want to keep it really flexible. So each ontology can kind of stand on its own. It can be a little package, and that little package can have a little community that can maintain it and think about where it needs to go. But it's really easy for someone to say, hey, I built a new tool and it uses this ontology and this one, but here's a new ontology that has to go with it for our tool to work. So people can just propose these all the time. And yeah, the management system around this is going to be, the idea is very democratic. It's basically a GitHub repo and a community that will manage each of the ontologies. And that's kind of how we're imagining governmentally this thing goes. So we're even right there. Like, I'm kind of curious how people are even thinking about that as a high level concept. Like, are there parallel projects we can take wisdom from? Are there things you've seen crash and burn that have tried this? Are there things that you feel like are exciting or dangerous about this idea? Like, I'd love even just that.
Yeah. So here is a challenge. So like, I mean, especially from my previous software engineering background, like I think the biggest challenge is to persuade people from going through the initial cost of adopting them. So basically, if you think about like, I mean, every single time you start a project and you started to realize, okay, like we need to do something, we need to learn stuff, we need to get things. And the probably the biggest thing that we think about is like we want to really start to jump into what are interested, like what interests us. And this is likely some research question not related to like gathering data. Like some of us are interested in gathering the data, the process itself, or processing the data itself, but most people are interested in some other research questions. Like at that point, like we're basically saying like, here's a tool that you must use. Like you have to use it for some reason. Like once we go that way, then it usually causes some resistance. Of course, I know that it's not about we forcing something to happen, especially like when we are talking about a proposal or talking about something we plan to do, it's not yet there. But just think about, for example, industry standards that people has to obey. Like if it's one or two, it's not a big deal. But if there are a lot of these, then if you think about in companies, there's actually like compliance department who is actually just doing that thing. They're just going through all the industry standards. They are just saying, okay, we have to do this, we have to do that. And people immediately start to burn out after looking into all these standards. So like, what is the way that you think we can make this process fun, we can make this process rewarding, and don't have to involve people looking at another, de facto industry standard and freak out?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to layer onto that, am I hearing? Yes. To layer onto that, when we have games at PBS Kids that go through our more detailed event structure piece, like that does cost a lot of extra time, both from us to create the event spec, but also from the engineers to implement it. And I would think that if you didn't already have, and we include extra funding for these games to do that. And so something we've been talking about is that our producers want more data, but it would like, how are we putting the cost on them to get it? And so we're trying to get like a pared back version of some things, which I think kind of fits in with this ontology idea of like, if you want the full thing, then like you should be tracking these events. But if you want like the basic package, as it were, you just have to do these X events. But thinking through like those folks, sorry, there's all online processing. Part of the struggle is that it's much easier to integrate the events as you're doing the game. And so you know that you want these research events or like these event tagging things while you're building the game. And in our experience, because my team has done this and we're still fiddling with this process of when's the right time to get these event structures in. And it's harder to do after the fact. Like if the game is already built and then you're like, oh, and now I want to go add on to these things. Like that's actually more difficult than if you had known this in the first place. And so for us at PBS Kids, we like kind of have these standards and the producers know what to expect. And we say that, but if you're not that, or like if you're some other independent group that's like, I'm going to try to make this game. And then I'm seeing, oh, I should also do this. Like that process, they might not be at this place that they're ready to adopt such a thing. And so how do we make it easier to add on after the fact? I mean, it's not impossible, but it's, in our experience, the developers prefer implementing the events as they're, developing and finalizing the game, not at the very end as a last step.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like one thing to add that I didn't really get a chance to mention is that like this will only become harder if it's not at the beginning of the project. When we talk about compliance, like once it goes to the end of the project, it's not compliance, it's about it's about changing the requirements of the system to allow them to deal with data, which is usually an even bigger cost.
Can I float, again, working meeting, because everybody's already on board with game data research, so that's nice to establish. Let me float a straw man response, because this is the kind of thing that we really need to like, I want to perfect this, and we're starting with a very warmed up crowd. So I think the response here is actually like in the middle of what Jesse was saying is that producers and executive producers want insights about so focusing on the production side, and this one maps really well to industry, I think. They want insights about the basic stuff. Who's playing it? What are they using? How far are they getting? Are there any usability issues? Are there any major drop-offs because the pacing of challenge is off? So it's all the like game design-y kind of stuff. And producers want that. And the response to this question would be because you adopt one of these ontologies, because if you do, you get millions of dollars of analysis tools for free if you adopt these ontologies now. So it's just straight up more for less argument.
I've just been thinking about the role of Google Analytics as well. And like, the new, I don't know how new it is. Anyways, Google Analytics 4 event structure is really nice. It actually aligns with our, like the way that PBS Kids learning events, like that structure is set up, generally speaking. And I find the tools that come with Analytics 360 impossible to use for the purposes that I want to use them. So I've been half joking, half serious about sort of needing to rebuild Analytics 360 to be something that I actually want to use, because Analytics 360 is very focused on sort of business metrics, and that's not always sort of what we're looking for in terms of like it's really hard to tell if like this level's really like is unexpectedly difficult versus a different level. Like there's been basic, what I consider basic analyses of like finding those sticking points or drop-off points. That's really hard with Analytics 360, and it's really frustrating, especially for folks that are not as data literate. Like I think it's very easy to not set something up the right way and think that you're answering a question, but you aren't really, or like that's not really what those data tell you. And so this could be a way that it's like, here's how to help make sure that you get the answers that you want and you get like all these tools, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And with all that said, if there's a way to make it also compatible with Google Analytics in some sense, that could be useful for separate ideas of, I hate Analytics 360 and
yeah, I'll tell you, like, just now I'm speaking just as a studio, we use both because the how many players, how many sessions, where are they from, how long do they play?
Yeah.
There's so many tools around the Google Analytics like ecosystem that I've got like every screen in our office has real-time reports of all of our games flashing up on the screen on rotation, right from our Zoom rooms. There's so many tools to do that kind of graph and that kind of analysis that I'm like, why would we ever try to build that? Like, let them pay for it. But it's then everything beyond that. It's like a brick wall. And it's just like, then it's just like Python, like just direct, right? For anything beyond how many players, how long, where are they from?
Exactly.
It's just like,
but that's what, right. And that's what our producers are asking for more of, is understanding what's tricky. Why are kids coming back? How many, like we put all these options into our games. How many options are even being used? Like we built 25 levels. Do kids play 25 levels? Why did we put so much effort into developing 25 different levels? I mean, that's the idea. And that is difficult to get with. It's difficult to get easily with Analytics 360. Again, we have tools where we send at least some of our data to BigQuery, and like we can get that session level data and do analysis on our end, but like our producers don't have access to that, and so it's not as super easy. And that's where I joke that I would like to rebuild Analytics 360 with our own platforms, but
I think that's the response to why would studios and producers do it, is that the assumption is that anyone that hasn't been living under a rock is probably thinking about using data to inform their design practices, and that there's a trend around that that's not going away. It permeates our are maximizing capitalist society for better or worse. So that's for that argument. The next one I think would be for researchers. We have to answer the question, why would you conform to an ontology? Meaning, why would you make a tool or an analysis that works? And I think the answer to that is that of the researchers that I know that are in like educational data mining and learning analytics and stuff, so far they've been so tied to one game that whole careers basically just end when that game expires, or you reach the limit of that game because you build so much stuff that hooks into the one game. So the idea would be, if you're really thinking about learning science research, let's say you're trying to study embodiment or trying to study narrative or something, that research initiative could move between projects that you don't even know, that don't even exist today. And that would be the argument there, is that it makes your research more portable, and it also makes it then arguably more generalizable. So you don't always get reviewer number 2 that says, that's great that you dug into that game over and over and over, but can we learn anything about learning generally, not just your one particular experimental design? So I think that's the intro argument. I wonder how well that even flies.
And I think scaling for researchers or production groups, like if there's a standard way of doing this, it becomes easier to develop the specs for other games moving forward rather than trying to like start over every time. Again, for PBS Kids, our numbering system for events has worked out really well, that like we always know that the 4100 event is the submit answer button, and sometimes that looks a little bit different, but we know that it's the 4100. And so it's like, as somebody that came in and learned this system later, like having that precedent has made it faster to develop, like say, what should the spec look like for this game? And it's still really customized, but it's faster customization.
So I just want to add that so we have 4 games that we work with, but Zumbinis itself is 12 different puzzles. They're basically like each individual game in there. And I started with Impulse, but I copied that spec over for every other game. And I think the big categories that you're talking about are your ontology, right? Like stuff about session and time and all of that, and session about events and what are they doing, and then things that you want to know, like counts that you want to keep track of, and then other things that are tied, we think theoretically tied to learning. And it follows that kind of pattern. Yes, it's more in depth in some things than others, but I use the same variable names, I use the same they mean the same thing in most cases. So I think that having an ontology that was well established and publicized would be really good for people that are new trying to plan.
That's another thing to decouple our conversation there a little bit, is how do we retrofit and stuff? I'm like, I don't know. That's like an age-old problem. I don't know. Yeah, like through lots of time, effort, money, and heartache. But how do we like do something today that sets up future us to like be in a better spot? Like that's the move we have right now. And that's hitting me on so many levels. But I think I like because we've seen examples of it. You know, something I would love to do, and here is, I would love to boil that argument down into, if you look at Turk and their analysis that everybody knows and loves, they saved this amount of dollars and years in project 2 and this amount of dollars and years in project 3. And
I will say that the amount of labor that we label, so your detectors that you're talking about in your paper, we actually do human labeling with that. It cut our time from our first game to our Zumbinis by 2/3. it took us like a year the first time, and it took us 3 months the second time to do double person labeling of.
So it only, it cut it by 2/3, meaning it cost us.
So it's 1/3 of what
it
it originally was.
Yeah.
Because now all of that stuff is synchronized. And the tool is there. If you want to think about what part of what we're learning from Safe Insights, or one of the things that was added at NSF's request, is a lot more about community, and especially early researchers. So if you had an ontology and you had funded researcher, beginning researchers or postdocs or whatever through your program, they learn this ontology, and then that becomes, the first time they do it, it's difficult, but then they carry it over into other things that they do. I just think that that's a way to help it grow, and then they get access to all these tools. And another thing from Safe Insights is anything that they put in stays in the system. So if they create a new measure for something, you keep it.
That one blurs on then the reason for infrastructure generally. So like, we're just loving the fact right now, like again, as a studio I'm speaking, or as a research studio I'm speaking, that, we build a feature and it's not in one Python file on Stefan's desktop. In my mind, Stefan's desktop is this thing I keep coming back to, which is what it means to work with data scientists. So instead of it being on Stefan's desktop in some file, it's like deployed to a GitHub repo that runs on a production instance every night. And that feature now is live kind of forevermore. And it's put in a place that's inspectable, that's transparent, that we can iterate on, that we can version up and identify bugs in it and trace when that bug in that feature, like downstream, like what it would have affected and what analysis we need to rerun. And it just makes the whole thing very exposed. And I feel like ontologies, in terms of like events and the ways data flow, have a similar effect, where it's like you can see the gaps in your own thinking because it's all very open. It's all very like clear. What's the link, Jesse?
I was just putting in the COBIDOS is how I say it, report for standardizing data for neuroimaging. I think that many, like from the researcher perspective, I think many of the same, like they'll have the same arguments and responses of like improving reproducibility and cost sharing, because now other people can access your data, which is, something that I'm a fan of like, we collect so much data, our one team cannot analyze it all. So can we please get other researchers that are familiar with this type of data, they could analyze it more easily and get the science out. I feel like the researchers are not difficult to convince. I think it will be more of the industry folks, and especially like new people that maybe aren't as sure what they're going to do with that research. I think another area to talk about, like who you're convincing, is funders. And so again, if you can get funders to sort of require or expect or whatever these standards for all of these reasons of, I mean, for research funding, obviously there's all of that, but like investors in education tech games or something like that, like they want to know that what you're doing is correct. If there's a way to sort of convince those folks that this is the way to do that and get that information, that's always tricky, but
yeah, that's good.
just thinking about.
So you could make the argument that funders could say, so let's imagine I'm a program officer at NSF, and I would say, if you connect with these standards that are developed by your peers of data researchers, we're going to know that the data quality is high. We're going to know that it's going to fit in and serve the larger research community, not just your one lab, your one time.
And you could talk about your broader impacts of, you can use it to train people in this system, as you were saying, of, now you've learned how to use this data structure once, you're going to be able to apply it more easily to your other games.
Yeah, and even like supporting construction of new EDM, new data people. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so I feel like that's a good start. I'm realizing we're like 40 minutes in, we haven't even got into any of the detail. We're at the why level. Let me throw out some of the places we're starting, or I wouldn't even say we're starting. I would just say like first thoughts of like, what would these ontologies be shaped like? And I don't think we have this down yet, but got to start somewhere. So the first set of them were things like we would have an ontology for user and session management, and this would handle a lot of the analytics style stuff. How many players? Are they moving between games? Are they playing for 18 minutes? That kind of stuff. I won't even dig into that much. The other one is progression. This one is like, how are they moving through the game? Content, world, environments, like, and this starts getting us into kind of the stuff that the producers often want, just like what's going on? Like, is there a huge drop off between level 2 and level 3? In your open world, are there whole areas that are just never getting visited or that people are getting stuck in? So it's those kinds of questions. VR replay is one that we just have to do right now because we're cranking out all these VR games and we need the replay. So we're kind of developing this one as we go. And I'll present on this in some other open game data, by the way, because it's going super well. But you can imagine that one going into desktop and multiplayer replay. And I'll tell you, like from the VR replay, what we've learned is we've got a Unity plugin that you can put on any object within your Unity scene to say this is a replayable object. And if you do that and you use the Unity client and you record the events the way it wants them recorded, formatted up in JSON a certain way, it just works. It's really cool. It's like you attach the object to the things in the game, like the gaze and the left hand and the right hand and like certain objects you care about. And then you play the data back through it and it's just like, voila, and you just see what they saw. So I'm imagining expanding that to the other places you would do it. And then one that we talked about yesterday was like the idea of a decision point. So we define in the knowledge tracing world, like when there was a moment in gameplay that we would think of as a, I mean, the evidence-centered design world, you would say it's a moment that it like acts as some sort of task or acts as some sort of assessment or is a specific tell for how someone is thinking and thinking about how to, or you called it, Jesse, you mentioned a 4,000 event that was like a submit or something. Where like, there's moments like this that exist that are like particularly bringing it to a head and that you might want to look at if you're going to do some sort of assessment design. So those are some of the ones we thought like early brainstorm. And I'm kind of curious if that helps, like, one, does it start to define the shape of what an ontology is? And then the other part of it is like, do these kind of grain sizes of functionality make sense to give a name to? And then are these some of the ones that come to your mind first as like key functional structures? That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, like I think these are really interesting. Like the one thing that kind of also immediately jumped out to my mind is like how, like, I mean, like a few functionalities are great, but what happens if a lot of things come together and they started to conflict each other? Like eventually, if we are trying to make them compatible with each other, once we go that far, we're developing another Unity, we're developing another Unreal Engine. And it's not the worst thing if you think about, for example, people doing Minecraft. Like I was planning to talk about that 20 minutes ago when you started to see like when everything was, instead of thinking about there are multiple games, like whenever you have a game that is extremely extensible to the extent that people can just build a game on it, like Roblox, like this is where like a universal structure becomes more promising because you're giving, like, there's some out of game data research, like, I mean, benefits that people are getting alongside with what our functionalities in open games would be benefiting them. Like they get extensive games, they can share it easily, they can easily combine other stages other people built. And these are all nothing related to open game data itself. So like, I think like this becomes a challenge because like it doesn't seem like we are in, I mean, building an extensible game is like full interest to the group. Like we are still trying to adhere to a specific things that we do not have control. And if Unity suddenly says that, okay, like we are going to update our object APIs, then maybe we will start to freak out. Like, I mean, we have this kind of like obsolete plugins that happens tons of times. Like, do you think to achieve our goal, we actually need to build a game platform that people can actually not depend on other game engines, so that they would have full control, so that they can fully join the open game data community easily?
I don't think so, and I think the high level way of thinking about this, in my mind, has been we always build the absolute minimum amount of stuff we can build. That's absolutely the lightest weight thing that it can be, and it's absolutely as least vendor locked as possible. And if we define a thing that says VR replay requires these data, then if the client library doesn't work in a new version of Unity or Unreal, then we still have the definition of the ontology out there, and we can just make a new plugin that is compatible with the new version of the thing, because we have our structure outside of any sort of vendor. This has been one of the reasons why we're like have been really, never aligned with anybody. It's like we look at every part of the pipeline and you're like, we could swap you out in like less than a few days if we needed to. Like if BigQuery gets shady with us, you're gone, right? Like we'll swap you out. Like every module is totally replaceable. And I think ontologies are the pure furthest thing you can do in that regard. Where you're like, this is just an idea that is separate from an implementation, but the idea coordinates. I think so. Just to call that out, like I don't think we ever want to create a one tool to rule them all. I think we always want to be thinking about little things that link together because of ideas.
Yeah. Like I was thinking about, for example, the transition from SQL to NoSQL. Like all these queries no longer works because in NoSQL, not every element, not every single object had all the columns. And that also happens in, like if you think about OOP, like we started with procedural based, like programming, and then we go into OOP, and then now people are doing a lot of declarative things. And like these may be so fundamental changes that even the ontology itself may need to adapt to them. Like if object does not even exist in in the game's program, like everything is just a message passing around, then like it can be very challenging for people to try to make object definitions in an older ontology, which is actually about object-based, right? So like I'm talking about these kind of breaking changes. Like there may be something that like from an analytical perspective, like we may not want to decide, or we may not even have the privilege to decide. To decide. Like maybe the engineering team says that like OOP is really good, declarative is really good. Maybe that game engine that does not even work as OOP may actually be better. And if we cannot persuade them to change this, because like analytics are only part of the whole production cycle, right? Like what would be our strategy here? Like this is probably like, this is something that if it happens, it's not just analytical issue. It's just not just the game analytics people freaking out, it's the whole department freaking out, but just want to place it here.
I think that's where the building block pieces come from, though, is that like there's the ontology and then there's here's how to do it in Unity. So if you're doing it in Unity, you can just pull this in. But if you're doing it in a different engine, then you're going to have to make one or work with somebody or whatever to make one that will work with your other engine. And so same thing, if a breaking change comes, then like there's going to also be a breaking change in the sort of ontology plugin, as it were. And then, which then my question is, who maintains and builds all of these, I'm not sure it's necessarily going to work to rely on the goodwill of the scientific community. Maybe it will.
Well, that's literally the purpose of research infrastructure that's centrally funded. Yeah.
Lovely.
And we're like
Great.
literally saying we're going to have a team of 80 people that show up to work every day and coordinate,
Okay.
making sure that we've got clients in every major game engine and reusable features that work across things and pipelines for people to fold new changes in. And
Yeah.
that's like that's what we're asking
I
for.
know you're not. I know you're not talking about a big unifying tool,
Yeah.
but well, two things I want to say is the article was challenging. I mean, I deal with data all the time, but I don't deal with it as a data person. I deal with it as a researcher. So
Yeah.
everything for me is labeled in human speak.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of data terminology that's thrown into that article that I can't connect to as easily. I have to work
Which article?
really hard to connect to it.
The
So
Open Game Data article or this one?
No, not the neuroimaging, the other one, the one that you sent earlier
Okay.
today.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing I'm talking to about with Safe Insights is you can't assume that people know R. You can't assume that people know
Yeah.
how to code. You can't assume they know databases.
Yep.
Technical sense.
Yep.
Everybody, researchers know what a database is, but they
Yeah.
don't necessarily know all the technical pieces of it.
Yeah.
And being able to say, okay, here's this nice ontology, and and here's the session management ones, and here's a time, and I've got this variable, it's called time, and I say, okay, this is I match them. I match the ones I want into your system, and not all of them. And there's an easy way, an easy interface for me to do that so that I can see what tools are available to me because I have XYZ data.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. And I want to say also the ontologies, I would say key actions instead of decision points.
Yeah.
There are key actions that happen. Like with us, with Zumbinis, it's when you send your pizza to the troll. That means you think you have an answer, right? But there's also sequences of actions that are meaningful. And it's not just individual time points. It's that, oh, they did this thing 3 times in a row. Those types of things are also important. And we have features for those. And we build features for those.
Yeah.
So I just want to add that.
Yeah. For me,
instead of decision point, it seems more like key action would be more flexible and open.
It's like the action level analysis, which can be sequences. It can be, for me, it was important to be actions within context.
Yes, that's the key. I think that might be one for us to dig into a little bit because I don't understand it the most, but I have the desire for it. So for me, it's really funny. We do everything we do is action based, and then Open Game Data is kind of set up around that, right? Like it's time sequence actions either by the player or the system, and they're all happening in this time sequence. But it's funny because I was going back through an analysis we're doing on Game Wake, and then we realized like you do all kinds of cool stuff, and you can do all kinds of cool analysis on that stuff that you do in the game, but there's these particular moments that happen within the argument mechanic that are like, oh, these are just windows directly into what a kid thinks. It's like there was this context that brought them to a decision point with a finite number of choices to how to go forward, and that thing was explicitly designed to elicit their thinking. So that's how I looked at this idea that you had, Eric. Like, it's like those would be the ones I would put out as decision points. And I'm like, and if I needed to build a BKT, like a knowledge tracing, or if I needed to do evidence center design, these would be like the first places I would look, are the ones that are labeled like this.
For me, the whole point of that API is actually not that those key moments are pre-tagged. They are the data, they are the raw data that you can use to define the tagging of those key moments after the fact. Like, you're not committed to them being important a priori. Yeah. I mean, you can tag them that way, sure, and that's a feature, but it's not the point of the ontology. The point of the ontology is to give you the affordance to find those things after the fact. And so that's why you need like the context of the game. You need the parameters on the action. So it's not just they did verb, but they did verb with parameters XYZ. because you can't make those judgments otherwise. My baseline assumption and everything is that we didn't get it right the first time, so I never trust that, like,
Yeah, totally. Our analysis
the
is
game
always totally
correct, or that it's coming through, or that players interpreted it correctly. And to do that, you need this level of data,
Yeah.
because otherwise you're just assuming you got it right the first time, and what if you're wrong?
Yeah, using my example for that too, it's funny because it's 2 years after launch that we did a bunch of other analysis and then realized how important these particular things were. So this brings up my question is like, every action that someone makes in a game. So the assumption I have is that every row in a database is an action someone made at a game given a certain context. What makes these a separate ontology? It's what the data is. Like, is there something about these that particularly define and create space for a downstream analysis or tool that aren't just baked into that's what events are in this database?
To me, your other ontology categories don't imply that the data lives at that grain size. To me, progression implies you got to level X, and that is the only thing we know about you. Is that you started the level, you ended the level, and we know absolutely nothing about what happened in between those. And you could come up with a system that records at that level. It'd be very low resolution, but
yeah, it technically would fit within.
Cheaper to implement, probably.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of, for me, this was like a dissension in grain size, or I guess an increase in whatever way you want to see grain size goes.
Yeah, my presupposition going in here, I was blind to it, was you're recording everything. That's like, so now it's like, what do we label the parts of everything so that downstream tools work? And so this thing is saying, if you do this, you're logging at, the thing that this ontology brings is that you are thinking about player actions within context and sending as much of that as possible to understand. Is that right?
Yeah, and I was also kind of thinking about it from a slight engineering standpoint of like the extent to which this could happen automatically. So like the first one, if you import our library, you're gonna get a start and an end message. It's just how the thing works. It's gonna happen. The progression one, if you're thinking Unity, like it could automatically scene load, scene unload, and you get that basically automatically. Engineer doesn't have to make any decisions. Actions, intrinsically, you have to implement.
Can we call this just actions?
Yeah, it's just called actions.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That makes way more sense to me, because otherwise it's this blurry line of like assigning importance early, which I do think is kind of interesting, by the way, still, which is like, and I don't know, I'd love to pick into that a little bit, but so actions are almost like this one's pretty wild, actually.
And then if you want to reorder them in that hierarchy, I think VR is the next layer, or replay is the next layer down, because that requires also state recovery of state definition, which is.
Yeah, I'm not sure they are a hierarchy, but I'm pretty sure they're not. Other than I know we get this one for free by just having, if you have an Oculus client or a whatever Godot client or whatever, you're going to get this one for free. That's the assumption. Okay, we're like right at time, and obviously this conversation is just beginning. Gosh, I'm not real sure how to proceed other than that. We obviously need time talking about this and to think about what the parts of it are. I can say we've got this set of projects that is going to be played a lot coming out. So like we have to put something in place. And what I'm thinking is that we're going to try to define a users and session management, like version 0.1, and a actions 0.1 and a progression 0.1, and we're going to go for it. But it'd be really cool if before we went for it, if I could like shoot those documents around of like what the names of the events are and what data has to be there. And it'd be great if anybody would like look at that and be like, don't do that. I've done that. That's no good.
If you can make it non-techie, human readable, then I would happy to.
Yeah. Okay.
And or I'm still pushing the names. Sorry, the numbering system.
Yep.
In addition to names, because the names, right? I don't know what I mean, I know what a 4100 is, but I don't know what a 4014 event is off the top of my head. It goes with the name, but like the numbers is what makes it more flexible.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because the different things mean different things in different contexts.
Did you send that along to me, Jesse? Because I realize that we talk about it all the time, but I don't have your mapping, and I'd love to see them.
Yeah.
Do you have that like a chart?
Yeah, we need to touch base.
Yeah.
I'll Slack you after.
We use numbering too,
Yeah.
but we have a side by side that says
Yeah.
this number's this number's
Yeah.
this.
I've heard a
but
lot of
the-
people say that they really want that because it helps you just kind of quickly parse the general
Right.
categories. of
Because when you're
things.
reading the log, you can see this is
Yeah.
exactly what they did.
Yeah.
And it's very fast.
So, Jesse, I've got that to follow up and our other conversation on Slack. And everyone else, I will assume that we're going to take one more step. This conversation is really helpful to kind of confirm and to bring some critiques. And I think our next move is that we'll shoot out the potential requirements of the first couple of what these are that we're thinking about adopting here in the next couple of months for a bunch of games that we're going to roll out, and just get a sanity check on it. Because if we build it, we're going to build all the analysis that go with it, all the features, and we're going to build some basic visualization of it as well, which means if anybody else's game uses those, all that stuff's just going to work, which is neat. I'm like excited to have that first moment where you're like, oh, then they did a thing and it plugged in, and then look at everybody got stuff for free like magic. Okay, you're awesome. I so deeply appreciate this time to hang out with like-minded folks and dig into this world. I have so much to talk with all of you about.